While the age of Flash games is well and truly gone, I still fondly remember some of them, so I decided to go back and see whether it's just nostalgia or if some of these games were actually good. This time I want to talk about Spectromancer. The game is available for purchase on Steam, but the way I know it and the version I will be talking about is the Flash version that used to be available on sites like Kongregate. The original concept of Spectromancer dates all the way back to 2002, when Alexei Stankiewicz released Astral Tournament. 4 years later, when Astral Tournament 2 went into pre-production, the project was joined by Three Donkeys, a game design and development consulting company that includes Richard Garfield, the creator of perhaps the biggest card game ever, Magic the Gathering. With their expertise, the game's scope expanded and it released in 2008 as Spectromancer. And at first glance, it might look like just another fantasy card game, but that could not be further from the truth. You play as a wizard controlling 5 magical elements. Fire is about AoE board clears and aggressive creatures. Water has versatile but more controlly cards. Air is primarily about dealing direct damage to the opponent. And Earth is about healing and defense. You always have access to these 4, but the last element is dependent on your class. Where it gets interesting is that you don't ever draw any cards in Spectromancer. You start each duel with 20 cards divided between the 5 elements, and these 20 is all you are going to get. The good news is that you can play any of them as many times as you want, and they will never disappear from your hand. The system provides consistency and full information to the player, something that is pretty much antithetical to the vast majority of card games. You can devise a strategy and guarantee that you'll be able to execute it. So you gain mana, you cast spells, you play your creatures, but here comes another twist. The combat is actually an auto-battler. At the end of your turn, all of your creatures without summoning sickness automatically attack the opposite tile. If they hit a creature, it takes damage but does not retaliate. If the opposite tile is empty, the damage goes to the opponent's face. Bring their HP to 0, you win the game. Because you can't choose blockers or attack the other, you could call them lanes, positioning is very important. You can also only ever play a single card each turn. Now, that might make you think all Spectromancer is about is just control, because how can aggro exist in this world? The biggest, most expensive card each turn is obviously the best play, right? Well, to answer this, we need to talk about what I think is the best card game resource system I've ever played with. And to illustrate its genius, let's explore both sides of the resource spectrum. On one side, there is Hearthstone. You start with 1 mana crystal and you get 1 more every turn until you reach 10. They refresh every turn, so you always want to spend as much mana as possible. This system is extremely simple, consistent, but has almost no design space. Mana interactions in Hearthstone are rare and limited to increases or decreases. On the other side, there is Magic, in which you need to draw and play lands, cards you put into your deck to gain mana. Lands also refresh each turn, so they end up functioning sort of like mana crystals, only Magic has 5 different colors of mana, and a card will usually require a specific color or colors to be played. Because lands are cards, this system has infinite design space. There are lands that can turn into card draw or creatures, lands that can be even your win condition. The downside is, it is highly inconsistent. It creates games where one of the players simply can't use any of their cards because they didn't draw the right lands. The statistical odds of this happening are not very high, but when it does happen, it sticks with you, and it can be extremely frustrating. Spectromancer strikes the perfect balance between these. Each of your elements have their own mana, which increases by 1 every turn, but it does not refresh. If you commit to the giant fire dragon, you can forget about casting any other fire cards for a while. To answer the original question, aggro does not exist, but neither does control or combo exactly. In Spectromancer, you have to constantly adapt your strategy to the situation. You don't look for the highest mana cost playable card, you look for the most mana efficient play. Maybe you try to stall the board with 1 earth mana elven healers, while you save up fire mana for a big board clear followed up by expensive creatures. Maybe you try to aggressively play for the board while sacrificing a whole element to try and get to the dream of infinitely resurrecting phoenixes. Or how about completely locking your opponent out of the game by reducing all their mana incomes by 1, so they end up having to just pass their turn? Yeah, this is definitely the most evil win condition in the game. But what's great is that these big plays are telegraphed. You always see how much mana your opponent has, so if they are hoarding 12 water mana, you might want to keep an answer for the Astral Guard. Carefully managing your mana economy is what ultimately wins you the game in Spectromancer. And it's so fun because every turn you have many different cards to play, so you constantly have to make a lot of decisions. It is by far the most satisfying mana system to me. Always consistent, but without sacrificing all of the design space, and adding a whole element of prediction and mind games. Now, when I say mind games, I've only ever played this game against the computer. The Flash version does not have multiplayer, and even if it did, I doubt you would find any players. But I imagine the system would work amazingly well in PvP. Thankfully, the AI is very good and more than capable of outplaying you without ever making it feel like it's cheating. There are a few modes you can challenge it in, but I think by far the best one is the League of Heroes, which is an 8-player tournament where everyone plays each other once, and at the end, the best performing Spectromancer becomes the winner. Each of the opponents have a bit of their own personality, bringing in little twists like the Illusionist disabling 10 random spells every turn, or the Demonologist starting with a weak imp that disables his demon cards until it dies. What's great is that you don't use a constructed deck for this mode. Each game the cards are randomized, but there are rules to make sure you never end up with an unplayable set of cards. So for example, you will always have a way to heal, some removal, you will always have some early game plays and a few late game threats, and it makes it so that you can't just keep using the same strategy over and over. I've spent many hours over the years beating this mode on the highest difficulty with every class, multiple times even. It's a decent challenge and it's always so fun to come back to it. Speaking of the classes, there are 16 of them to try out. Cleric excels at keeping its creatures alive through healing or board clears, and on the top end it has powerful angels, but to me it's the class with Holy Guard, which might be the most annoying card in the game because it's so cheap but so incredibly effective at getting you ahead on the board. Necromancer has Emissary of Dorlak, a 4-mana massively overstated creature that can only be played by replacing one of your own creatures, but this trade-off is very worth it and it can take over the game extremely quickly. It also has Blood Ritual, one of the best board clears in the game. It has a Banshee, which is amazing at weakening powerful creatures, and Master Lich is the finisher for this class, a board clear on a big body that can even generate mana. Mechanician is all about amazing passive board control tools, with Dwarven Rifleman and Ornithopter early, and then, once you ramp with Overtime and Dwarven Craftsman, you have Cannon and the Steam Tank to never let your opponent back in the game. Dominator might be my favorite class because its cards are designed to make your opponent absolutely miserable. The beautiful Ancient Horror can completely lock the opponent's creatures out of the game, and if that doesn't work, you can always reduce the opponent's powers or simply play Mind Stealer, who is a big creature that is impossible to kill in creature combat. Chaos Master is about the insanity of RNG, with powerful but unpredictable outcomes for all of its cards. My favorite strategy is just simply spamming the Berserkers, who are very good at quickly killing your opponent. Alternatively, you can save up for Insanian King, who generates a ton of value every turn. Illusionist I find to be the closest class to aggro in this game. It will do a lot of damage to your face with cards like Wall of Reflection, just guaranteed 20 damage, and Spectral Assassin, and if you play creatures to try and defend yourself, you'll get hit with Hypnosis or Spectral Mage. This class feels almost impossible to stabilize against if you fall even a little bit behind. Demonologist has really sticky creatures which often respawn on death, a bit of removal, and then 2 big demons. My favorite, 3-headed demon, first controls the board through AoE attacks, and if it dies, it responds as a healer. It's one of the best cards at stabilizing. On the other hand, Greater Demon is better at closing out the game with an explosive, possibly 10 damage to all enemies entrance. Sorcerer only has spells. He can throw some fireballs and heal, but I find it's usually worth saving up for either Sonic Boom or Disintegrate, which both have an enormous impact on the game, allowing you to either close it out or come back from even really bad positions. Beastmaster is the only class in the game that actually has 25 cards. It only has creatures, beasts, like this cute magic hamster, and while they are in play, their card gets replaced by their ability. For example, the hamster can heal all friendly creatures. My favorite out of these is the Death Falcon, because it has ridiculously good stats and the ability to jump to adjacent tiles so that it's never stuck in an unfavorable combat. Goblin Chieftain commands annoying agile goblins, one of which can even permanently destroy the opponent's cards if he gets to hit face. And while this could do a lot of psychic damage to the opponent, I prefer saving up for the expensive cards like Goblin Raider or Red Master, which both provide a guaranteed powerful effect. Mad Hermit starts out with a 1/10 Magic Rabbit, which slowly gains attack every turn. It's very fragile, and when it inevitably gets killed, it simply gets resummoned on the next turn, reset to a 1/10. To offset permanently having a creature on board, the Hermit's cards are all pretty weak. I mostly just use either the Crazy Squirrel to deal 8 damage to something, or the Enraged Beaver. Everything else, especially the finisher, the Angry Bear, is just sad and overcosted. Chronomancer breaks the rules of the game with cards that allow you to attack multiple times or past the opponent's creatures. If you can resist playing the amazing cheap cards, you can summon the Chrono Engine, which allows you to play 2 cards per turn. This is one of the more interesting cards because this effect sounds super overpowered, but when you play it, it just kind of makes you run out of mana very quickly, so it's nice that this can also generate it. Warrior Priest is the Deus Vult Cleric, sacrificing some healing for damage and high attack creatures. Spamming Holy Avenger has always performed really well for me. These guys have a cool icon and can hold down the board until you have mana for your expensive win conditions. Vampire Lord's cards all cost health alongside the mana cost, and to help you not kill yourself, he drains 1 life from all of his creatures every turn, healing himself. All of the creatures in this class have insanely high stats and also powerful abilities, like this 6 mana, -12 life, 951. You pretty much have to kill this class quickly, because once it gets board control, it will never lose it, and if it has creatures out, it can sustain itself through the life drains. Cultist is about very powerful cards with some downside. Starting from the cheapest ones like Cultist and Zealot, I love spamming these guys, through the Blind Prophet, which barely has a downside, you are still getting +3 mana every turn, and all the way until the Greater Barghoul, annihilating the board and your own life total for the biggest creature in the game. And lastly, Golem Master starts with a golem out on the board. It is immune to everything but creature combat, and if it dies, or when it dies, it will immediately respawn, but this will cost you 10 life. You start with 60 by the way, so this is very spooky. You can permanently upgrade the golem over the course of the duel, and there are some really powerful cards like Garden Statue to buy time, and the Dark Sculptor to wipe the enemy board, but if you ever fall behind even a little bit, your golem will just kill you. As you can see, the classes are not as game-changing in Spectromancer, they just provide a bit of extra spice, sometimes gently nudging you towards a certain playstyle, but not limiting you to any. You can easily, and for free, try this game out yourself. You'll need the Spectromancer Flash file, which you can download from the Flashpoint archive, and then you'll need the Flash player. Unfortunately, you can't download it from official sources anymore, but I downloaded mine from here, it's linked in the description, and I've been using it for years without any trouble. Then you just open the Flash player, drag the game file in, and you're in. It takes like 2 minutes, and if you're a fan of strategy or card games, Spectromancer is definitely worth it.